Here is one of the strangest facts in all of medieval history. The two most famous enemies of the entire crusading age, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, the warrior king of England and the champion of Islam, the pair whose duel would be told and retold for 800 years, fought each other for more than a year, across 100 miles of coast and desert, in siege and battle and endless negotiation. And they never once met, not a single time. Face to face, the two most legendary rivals in the history of holy war never laid eyes on each other at all. Because that is what this duel really was. Not two men crossing swords in the sand, but two minds circling each other across a battlefield the size of a country. Trading blows through their armies, trading messages through their envoys, trading gifts and threats, and, in the end, a strange and genuine respect, without ever standing in the same tent. It is the most famous personal contest of the Middle Ages, and it was fought entirely at a distance. And by the end of it, each man would come to admire his enemy more than he trusted his own allies. Welcome back to History with Rohrmann. This is episode 5 of our 6-part series on the Crusades. Last time, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was destroyed in a single scorching day at the Horns of Hattin. The True Cross was captured, and the Holy City itself fell to Saladin, and the news crossed the sea and hit Europe like the crack of doom. This is the answer to that news. This is the greatest crusade of them all. The largest, the most famous, led not by landless younger sons but by the crowned kings of the West themselves. And here is the frame for the whole episode, so hold on to it. The Third Crusade gathered the greatest names of the age, the finest general the Crusades ever produced in Richard, the noblest opponent they ever faced in Saladin, and it threw everything it had at the disaster of Hattin. And it could not undo it. Richard would win almost every battle he fought and still never take Jerusalem back, because the hard lesson of Outremer still held. It is one thing to seize a city 1,000 miles from home, and another thing entirely to keep it after the ships sail away. This is the story of a duel that neither man truly won. Let's get into it. Start with the Three Kings, because the sheer scale of what Europe launched is the point. This was not an expedition. This was the West emptying its thrones. 3 of the most powerful monarchs in Christendom took the cross, and each brought an army, and each brought his own ambition, and the trouble is that they could not stand one another. First and greatest was Frederick Barbarossa, Redbeard, the old Holy Roman Emperor, the most prestigious ruler in Europe, a man who had been making and breaking popes for 40 years. He was well past 60, a veteran of an earlier crusade, and he raised the largest army of the 3, a vast German host that would march the whole way overland through the Balkans and Anatolia. When Barbarossa moved, the whole East trembled. Saladin is said to have watched his approach with more dread than anything else. Then there was Philip II of France, Philip Augustus, young, cold, brilliant, and political to his fingertips. He was no great warrior and never pretended to be. He was something more dangerous in the long run. A patient state-builder who spent every day of the crusade calculating, and whose real war was not with Saladin at all but with the Third King. And that Third King was Richard I of England, Richard the Lionheart. He is the face of this episode, so look at him closely. He was tall and powerfully built, with red gold hair, a soldier's soldier, fearless to the point of recklessness, magnetic, hot-tempered, cultured enough to write poetry and cruel enough to appall even his own age. Here is the thing people forget. Richard was barely English at all. He was born in England but raised in the south of France, spoke French, spent perhaps 6 months of his entire reign on English soil, and thought of England mostly as a treasury to be drained for war. He taxed it to the bone to fund this crusade. But as a battlefield commander, he was among the very best of the entire Middle Ages, and everyone knew it, and none of them knew it better than himself. Richard and Philip were supposed to be allies. They had grown up entangled, sworn friends one year and enemies the next, and they hated each other with the special venom of 2 men who know each other far too well. They set out together, wintered together, quarreled the whole way, and the seed of the Great War between England and France that would run for centuries was planted right here, on Crusade, between 2 kings who were nominally on the same side. So 3 kings set out for the Holy Land, and the greatest of them never arrived. On the 10th of June, 1190, Frederick Barbarossa was dead, and not in battle. His huge army had ground its way across Anatolia, fought through hostile country, and come at last to a river called the Salef in the mountains of the south. And there, in the space of a single afternoon, the mightiest monarch in Europe simply drowned. The accounts differ, that his horse slipped at a ford, that he plunged into the cold water to swim it and his heart gave out, that the current took an old man in heavy harness, but the ending is the same. They pulled the emperor's body from the river, and the crusade that had terrified Saladin more than any other died with him on the bank. It is one of the great ironies of the whole age. The most powerful of the 3 kings, the one Saladin feared most, was killed not by a Muslim arrow or a desert ambush but by a river, before he ever reached the Holy Land. And his great German army, its heart torn out, fell apart. Most of it turned around and went home. Only a small remnant struggled on to the coast, and in a footnote that would matter centuries later, out of the German survivors nursing their sick at the siege ahead would grow a new brotherhood, the Teutonic Knights. But the emperor's crusade was over before the real fighting had even begun. 2 kings left, and both of them were headed for the same terrible place, the walls of Acre. Acre was the greatest port on the coast, and by the time the kings arrived it had already become a wound that would not close. Back in 1189, Guy of Lusignan, yes, the same guy who lost everything at Hattin, released by Saladin on a promise he promptly broke, had done the one bold thing of his life. With a pitifully small force he had marched to Acre, a city held by Saladin, and laid siege to it. It should have been madness. It became the strategic heart of the entire war, because the siege of Acre was a siege inside a siege. Guy's crusaders sat down around the city's landward walls to starve it out, and Saladin promptly brought up his own army and sat down behind them, ringing the besiegers in their turn. So the Christians were the hammer and the anvil at once, attacking the garrison in front of them and attacked by Saladin's field army at their backs. For nearly 2 years it stayed locked that way, neither side able to break it, as more and more crusaders arrived by sea to swell the ring. And it was hideous. Penned into their siege lines in the coastal heat, the armies rotted, dysentery, fever, and famine killed men in their thousands, far more than the fighting did. Both sides suffered. It was mud and disease and slow death on an enormous scale, the grinding, unglamorous reality underneath the legend. Into that stalemate the kings finally came. Philip of France arrived in April of 1191 and set his siege engines to work. And then, in June, Richard arrived and everything changed. He came late because he had spent the voyage conquering Cyprus along the way, almost as an afterthought, seizing an island that would stay in Western hands for centuries. But when the Lionheart landed at Acre, the whole crusade seemed to catch fire. He threw himself into the siege with terrifying energy, driving the assault even while burning with fever, and within about 5 weeks of his arrival, the thing that had held for 2 years finally broke. On the 12th of July, 1191, Acre surrendered. It was the Crusade's first great triumph, and it was immediately poisoned by the men who won it, because the moment Acre fell, the fractures on the Christian side ripped wide open, and the first to go was Philip. The French king was sick. He had nearly died of disease in the camp, and he was sick of something else too. He was sick of Richard. At Acre it had become unbearably clear who the real leader of this crusade was, and it was not the King of France. Richard outshone him at everything, spent more, dared more, drew every eye, and so Philip made a decision that stunned everyone. With Acre barely fallen, he announced that he was going home. He left a body of French troops behind under other commanders, and he sailed for France. And the instant he got there, he began scheming against Richard's lands in Europe, working with Richard's own treacherous brother John. The crusade had cracked the alliance in two. From this point on, the Third Crusade is Richard's alone. And so is what happens next. Because now we come to the stain, the single darkest act of Richard's crusade, and we are going to look at it squarely. The surrender of Acre had come with terms. Saladin was to pay a great ransom, return Christian prisoners, and give back the true cross, and in exchange the garrison of Acre, thousands of Muslim soldiers, would be spared. But the exchange bogged down. Each side accused the other of stalling. The money and the prisoners and the relic did not come on the day Richard demanded them, and Saladin, perhaps genuinely unable to move fast enough, perhaps playing for time, delayed. And Richard, unwilling to be tied to a ruined city guarding thousands of enemy captives while the campaign waited, made a cold and terrible decision. On the 20th of August, 1191, he had the prisoners of Acre, by most accounts around 2,700 men, marched out onto the plain in front of the city, in full view of Saladin's army, and executed. There is no softening it, and we should not try. It was a massacre of helpless captives, done deliberately as a calculation. Defenders of Richard have argued the ransom talks had truly collapsed and he could not spare the men to guard them. It does not wash the thing clean. This is the same Richard who will, in a few weeks, be trading courtesies and gifts with Saladin across the lines. That is the hard truth of the man and of the age. The chivalry and the butchery lived in the same body. Hold both. Do not let the legend erase the plain, and do not let the plain erase everything else. He was both. And then, having done that, Richard turned south, and gave a display of generalship so masterful that it is still studied today. His problem was simple and brutal. To have any hope of Jerusalem, he had to move his army down the coast to Jaffa, across open country, in the summer heat, with Saladin's entire field army shadowing him the whole way, and Saladin's mounted archers, fast, elusive, deadly, swirling around his column, loosing arrows and vanishing before they could be caught. An army that broke formation to chase them would be cut to pieces. An army that stood still would be bled white. So Richard did the hardest thing in medieval warfare. He kept his men in perfect formation and made them take it. The march down the coast was a moving fortress. Richard anchored his right flank on the sea, where his fleet paced the army offshore carrying supplies, and he packed his infantry and crossbowmen on the landward side as a hard shell around the precious knights and horses in the middle. And he held them there under a rain of arrows, day after day, forbidding the knights to charge no matter the provocation, absorbing the harassment and grinding steadily south. The discipline it took was almost superhuman. And on the 7th of September 1191, near a wood at a place called Arsuf, Saladin threw his whole army at the column to stop it, and the trap Richard had been waiting for sprang shut. The Hospitaller knights on the rear, pushed past endurance, finally launched the charge. Richard read the moment and threw the whole weight of his cavalry in behind them. The armored charge smashed into Saladin's host and broke it, and drove it from the field. Arsuf was a clear, hard victory, the Lionheart's generalship in full flame, and it changed the strategic picture almost not at all. That is the heartbreak at the center of this crusade. Richard could win the battles. He could not win the war, because the war was not really about beating Saladin's army in the field. It was about Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was the one problem his genius could not solve. Twice Richard marched inland toward the Holy City. Once in the winter of 1191 into 1192, and again in the summer of 1192, he brought his army up through the hills to within a dozen miles of Jerusalem, close enough to feel it. And both times he stopped, and both times he turned back. And here is why, because it is the whole lesson of the series in one decision. Even if Richard stormed Jerusalem, he could not hold it. His crusaders were not settlers. They were going to go home. The moment the fleet sailed, the great garrison needed to defend an inland city surrounded by Saladin's territory would sail with it, and Jerusalem would simply fall again, and everything would have been for nothing. Taking the city was the easy part. Keeping it was impossible. It was exactly the trap of Outremer that we saw 2 episodes ago, and the finest soldier of the age could not think his way out of it. There is a story, and it may even be true, that as the army came within sight of Jerusalem, Richard raised his shield in front of his own eyes so that he would not have to look upon the city he had come so far to save and could not take. Whether he did it or not, it is the truest picture of this whole crusade. the greatest warrior of his day, in sight of the goal, refusing to look at what he could not have. And all through this, running alongside the war was the other thing, the thing that made this duel a legend. The strange, real, growing respect between Richard and Saladin. They never met, remember, but they never stopped talking. Envoys crossed between the camps constantly, and the two men took each other's measure at a distance and, against every expectation, came to admire what they found. When Richard's horse was killed under him in a skirmish, Saladin, hearing that a king should not have to fight on foot, sent him 2 fresh horses as a gift. When Richard lay burning with fever, Saladin sent him snow packed down from the mountains to cool him, and fresh fruit. There was even a proposal, half serious, wholly astonishing, to end the whole war with a marriage. Richard's own sister, Joan, wedded to Saladin's brother Aladil, the two of them to rule Jerusalem together, Christian and Muslim, and share the holy city between the faiths. Came to nothing, but that it could be discussed at all tells you everything about these two men. The chroniclers loved to draw the contrast in their weapons. Richard's broadsword, they said, was a great cleaving blade that could shear through iron, the raw, hammering strength of the West. Saladin's scimitar was a curved edge so fine it could slice a floating veil of silk in two in midair, the speed and elegance of the East. 2 kinds of greatness, 2 kinds of war, and each man came to see the greatness in the other. They admired each other, in the end, more than they trusted the allies at their own backs. But admiration does not feed an army, and by the late summer of 1192 both giants were spent. Richard had to go home. His brother John and King Philip were carving up his lands in Europe while he was away, and every week he lingered the more he stood to lose. And Saladin was aging and exhausted, his emirs weary of a war without end, his treasury drained by years of campaigning. Neither man could finish the other, and so, on the 2nd of September 1192, they made peace. The Treaty of Jaffa. It was, when you strip away the legend, a draw. Jerusalem would remain in Muslim hands. Saladin kept the prize of Hattin, and the true cross with it. But Christian pilgrims were granted safe, guaranteed access to the holy places. An unarmed Christian could once again walk into Jerusalem, pray at the Holy Sepulchre, and walk out unharmed. And the Crusaders kept a strip of the coast, from Acre down to Jaffa, a rebuilt foothold that would let the kingdom of Jerusalem cling to life for another century. Ruled now from Acre rather than the city it was named for. Neither man had won. Each had gotten the one thing he could not do without, and given up the thing he could not take. It was the honest arithmetic of 2 exhausted powers, and both of them knew it. There is a last, telling detail. Under the truce, Richard could have gone up to Jerusalem as a pilgrim, unarmed, and prayed in the city like any other Christian. He refused. He would not enter as a tourist the city he had failed to enter as a conqueror. And so the man who had come further than any other to reach Jerusalem sailed away from the Holy Land on the 9th of October 1192 without ever setting eyes on it. And the sea was not done with either of them. On his way home, Richard was shipwrecked and forced overland through the lands of an enemy he had insulted at Acre, Duke Leopold of Austria, who seized him and handed him to the emperor, and held the Lionheart prisoner for well over a year until England was bled once more to pay a colossal ransom for his release. And Saladin did not even have that long. Barely 6 months after the treaty, worn out by a lifetime of war, he fell ill in Damascus and died on the 4th of March, 1193. They found that the most powerful man in the Islamic world had given nearly all his wealth away in charity. There was scarcely enough left in his treasury to pay for his own funeral. Within a single year of the peace, the 2 great duelists were both gone from the stage, one in a foreign prison, one in his grave. That is where the Third Crusade ends. The greatest names of the age had met the disaster of Hattin head-on, with everything Christendom could muster, and the very best they could achieve was a stalemate. A strip of coast, a road for pilgrims, and a holy city still lost. The crusade had been carried to its most brilliant, most personal, most chivalrous height, and it had still, in the end, failed to do the one thing it set out to do. And the next great crusade would not even come close. Because after this exhausted draw, the West would gather itself one more time and launch the Fourth Crusade toward the Holy Land. And, in one of the most shocking betrayals in all of history, that crusade would never reach the Holy Land at all. It would turn aside and fall instead upon the greatest Christian city in the world and sack Constantinople. The Holy War was about to devour its own. The greatest duel of the age had ended in an exhausted draw. And the next crusade would aim at Jerusalem and strike Christendom itself in the heart. That is where our story ends next time in episode 6, the finale. If you're following the series, subscribe and I'll see you there.